Well, good evening, everyone. We're back together again. We're going to be looking at Chapter 8 this evening. Chapter 8 we're going to be doing in two halves, so this will be the first half of it. So we're in the extra class license manual. If you've managed to stumble into our videos just because you found them on the internet, highly recommend you go back to the very first one and view them all in series. Things build on one another, and that'll really help you. Definitely welcome to our online viewers. So here's our November 4th title slide. Next week we're going to be talking about amateur television and more the rest of the digital modes. Also just a little bit on digital television and slow scan TV. But that's you'll have to wait till next week for that one. I'd like to just throw up a few credits here. We've had people that have been a tremendous help to us in putting on these classes. The ARRL for sure, and their license manual, and enthusiastic support from their staff. Dave Kassler, of course, has been wonderful and has given us permission to use his graphics, which we've done liberally, at least I have. And past students, you folks have been wonderful. We get all kinds of tips about ways to remember things, ways that they've approached some of the questions. And that winds up being a part of future classes, so keep those inputs coming. So these are some of the things we're going to look at, starting off. And Kassler made some comments about some of these emission designators. These are FCC emission designators, and back in the late 60s, when I was first licensed, we had to put everything in our logbook, even test signals and CQs that weren't answered, and we had to use all of these emission designators as part of our logbook. That's all gone away, fortunately, so now it's still a part of the rules, but there aren't any test questions, so this is just kind of here for historical reference. It's still real and everything, but you won't really need to use it. It's very handy to have a copy of the FCC rules and regs as part of your station complement. So I put this link here. It's about $8. It's rules and regs with some additions, not changes to the rules, but some good preliminary information that the ARRL included. So we'll share that link. It's about $10, I guess. So, jumping right into modulation systems. Well, just first of all, a high-level concept. When we're sending a radio carrier out over the air, we want it to convey some kind of information. And that information is usually just voice. Sometimes that's data. So we've already touched on a lot of these. We've got amplitude modulation, frequency, phase. And frequency and phase modulation are both forms of angle modulation, so because they're so similar. So AM was the first voice mode in ham radio. Single sideband is a form of amplitude modulation. We just suppress the carrier in one of the sidebands. CW, believe it or not, is even classified as a form of amplitude modulation because we're starting out with an AM signal, just turning the carrier on and off, nothing in the sidebands. So here's an animation. We got a signal, just a continuous tone. For AM, we're varying the amplitude of the carrier in response to the signal being applied to it. And with FM, you can see that we're scrunching up the waveform and elongating it, kind of like a slinky, I guess you could say. But that's the concept of frequency modulation, or phase modulation looks much the same. And that varies, of course. It tracks the signal that we're modulating the carrier with. We've touched on some of these concepts in previous classes. So we already mentioned this. Now we'll expand frequency modulation a little bit here tonight with a couple of concepts. Modulation index, for example, and deviation ratio. Those are complicated sounding concepts, but I'll try to simplify them as much as I can. And we've got some good tips for the pool questions when we get to those. So the amount of frequency change, you see our slinky being bigger and smaller, is proportional to the modulating signal amplitude. So when we talk loud, we get a wider amount of deviation. By deviation, I mean swing from the center carrier frequency. And when we talk really soft, we get just a little bit. We've got some diagrams coming up. Now on the HF bands, there's something kind of special about 29 megahertz, and we'll be talking about that coming up as it relates to frequency modulation. And I mentioned that Kastler was willing to share his graphics, so I borrowed from them liberally. So let's kind of see what we've got here. We've got an FM carrier frequency of 3 kilohertz, or an FM carrier frequency, and plus or minus 3 kilohertz is what we're going to deviate from that carrier frequency. So the modulation waveform is shown here. So that's 3 kilohertz. And if we're going to modulate it at 1.5 kilohertz, notice that the applied signal is much smaller. So here we're talking softly, and here we're talking more loudly. Of course, this is a tone being showed, but it gives you the concept that the louder that modulating signal is, the more deviation you're going to have from the carrier frequency. So that's the concept that we're talking about. Double the speech level will double the deviation level up to a limit. We don't want that to be unlimited because otherwise we'd be interfering with adjacent channels. So here's the first thing that we're really adding in the extra material, the deviation ratio. And a couple of tricks to help remember this. Deviation ratio is the ratio of the maximum carrier frequency deviation to the highest audio modulating frequency. Now it's a ratio, and the first thing I want you to pick up on, we're talking maximum carrier frequency, and it says highest. We consider this the maximum audio modulating frequency. So it's a ratio of two maximum frequencies. That's the first thing to pick up on. And it's constant for a given radio. More on that to come. So here's our first calculation. And these are going to be really easy. It says, what is the deviation ratio of an FM phone signal having a maximum frequency swing of plus or minus 7.5 kilohertz if the maximum modulation frequency is 3.5 kilohertz? Well, here's the formula, and you can memorize all of that stuff if you want to, but the easiest way to do this is it's something like we had back in op amps when we were calculating gain. It's the same trick that applies here. It's always the bigger number divided by the smaller number, the way that they work these out. I think there's two pool questions like this. So 7.5 kilohertz divided by 3.5, 2.14. I won't bother to demonstrate that on the calculator. I think that's hopefully pretty obvious. So repeating the hint, for both, now we're talking about deviation ratio right now, but for both deviation ratio and modulation index calculations, they will both work by dividing the bigger number by the smaller, and no unit conversions will be needed. And I said easy peasy. So we just looked at deviation ratio. Let's have a look at modulation index, the other technical thing we're going to be looking at related to FM. Modulation index is the ratio of frequency deviation to modulating signal frequency. Now, this sounds very, very similar to what we just saw, but there's something missing. Let me flip back. Here we've got the maximum carrier frequency and the highest or maximum audio modulating frequency. In this case, it's stated a little bit differently, and it's a different parameter. Modulation index is the ratio of frequency deviation, how much we swing either side of the carrier, to the modulating signal frequency, but a maximum is not specified. So this one's going to vary all over the place. If you're speaking into a microphone, that modulating signal frequency is going to be the full voice range of frequencies. The only way to make any sense of this in terms of measuring it is to apply a tone. It's the ratio of RF frequency deviation, as we saw, to the instantaneous modulating frequency. That just happens to be the frequency that we're modulating it with, I guess, and it varies continuously with speech. And here's back to our magic of 29 megahertz. I said that was special. 1.0 is the highest modulation index permitted at the highest modulation frequency for angle modulation below 29 megahertz. Now, angle modulation is kind of an umbrella term. It takes in both frequency modulation and phase modulation. Okay, so remember the number 1.0 and the fact that that's the highest modulation index permitted below 29 megahertz. We got 3 pool questions out of this one so far. Modulation index of a phase modulated emission does not vary with RF carrier frequency. So whatever the modulation index specification is, it's going to be the same on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Doesn't vary with RF carrier frequency. It remains constant for that radio. Oh, and here's a calculation example. And the same principle applies, but let's read through it. What is the modulation index of an FM phone signal having a maximum frequency deviation of 3,000 hertz, either side of the carrier frequency, if the highest frequency is 1,000 hertz? It's the same principle. Here they're using a continuous tone to make the calculation possible. So the bigger, 3,000 divided by the smaller, is 3. So again, these calculations are very, very easy. It sounds hard, but it really isn't. So again, I've just repeated this. We've already said it. FCC limits modulation index to a maximum of 1.0 under 29 megahertz. And here's a little excerpt from our color chart that Gary offers you for free if you want one. So I put in the 29 right here. So below 29, we're limited by this modulation index of 1.0. Above that, we are not. So let's consider a real-world case. Most deviation, not standard deviation, but what transmitters are set up is generally for a 5 kilohertz deviation. And at 3 kilohertz, which of course the voice modulation is between probably 0 and 3,000 hertz, so 5 divided by 3 is 1.67. So these completely normal numbers would actually not be legal below 29 megahertz. But above 29 megahertz, they are. So there's something called the Considerate Operator's Frequency Guide, and here's a link to it. This is something else that you should probably have in your folder of interesting information to have at your station. And it lists some of these things. I just picked out the part relating to 29 megahertz and above. So these are the frequencies that they say that they recommend hams use. And you'll notice that all of the FM frequencies are there. Repeater inputs, FM simplex, repeater outputs. So the place where you would be using FM on 10 meters is all above 29 megahertz. So I said that was a magic number. All right, so let's look at a few more definitions. We've seen this already, just reiterating. Deviation ratio is the ratio of the maximum carrier frequency deviation to the highest or maximum audio modulating frequency. All right, so we saw that already. What are the ramifications? Ratio of maximum allowable RF deviation to highest allowable maximum. I repeated the maximums there. It's a ratio of allowable maximums, or would that be maxima? I'm not sure. Both are set values. For example, plus or minus 5 kilohertz max RF swing and 3,000 hertz max audio frequency. These are set values determined by the manufacturer of your radio, something that you normally can't change. Modulation index now, the other one, is the ratio of frequency deviation to modulating signal frequency. The word maximum is missing in this definition. What's the difference? The word maximum. In this case, the RF frequency deviation is referenced to the audio frequency, but not necessarily maximums. During speech, the modulation index is constantly varying. The only way to make a meaningful measurement is to use a constant audio tone, which we showed in the example. So this just contrasts the two.
I remember it with modulation starting with M and momentary also starting with M. Okay, it's an instantaneous or a snapshot of what's going on.
That's what we mean by value added by our students or co-instructors in this case. I didn't remember that one, but that's a good way to do it, because the pool will ask us about each of these. The engineering definitions are different, calculations are identical. In our case, it turns out to be the biggest divided by the smallest, just by accident, the way the pool committee put the questions together. Now we're going to jump into something new called multiplexing. And I've got a little analogy here. Here's a box divided up into a bunch of little compartments. And each compartment, I've got transistors in there. So I've got all kinds of different transistors. I'm going to put them in a box, and then I'm going to ship that box to California, because California needs transistors, in case you were wondering. So technically, we're combining more than one stream of information into one modulated signal. Let's see how that works. We're going to be talking about frequency division multiplex. It's a concept where we're going to be using multiple subcarriers. And then we're going to be talking about time division multiplexing, where we're going to be interleaving two or more signals into discrete time slots. So time division and time slots go together. And in the case of frequency division multiplex or modulation, we've got multiple subcarriers. Diagrams coming up. Getting into the context of the pool question, frequency division multiplex, or FDM, we're dividing the transmitted signal into separate frequency bands that each carry a different data stream. Now this doesn't happen on HF, okay? Let me say that right away. It would take up way too much room. So where do we see this technique used? Amateur multi-carrier digital modes, we'll mention some of those. Early phone company carrier circuits, you might have heard of T1 and T3 circuits. Cable TV, FM broadcast subcarrier. So the Muzak that you hear in department stores is probably a subcarrier from a local FM station. You don't hear any broadcasting on, or you don't hear any advertising on those when you're listening to music in a store, because the stores pay subscription fees for that service.
I'll throw in one more example from my history with Voice of America. VOA had microwave links between Greenville, North Carolina, the station there, and the Washington, D.C. studios. There were multiple hops that made its way two-way from Washington to North Carolina and back, and they used frequency division multiplexing on the microwave carrier in order to carry various program channels from Washington and various receiver signals back up to Washington.
Yep, another practical application. I've got a bigger, or larger expansion of what I showed a minute ago. So here we've got, they're showing voice frequencies at 0.1 to 3.5 kilohertz. That's roughly the space of, that's the space that is occupied by a single sideband voice set of frequencies, and right at the base frequency. And then we're going to take the next channel and we're going to mix it with a subcarrier at 4 kilohertz. That will shift those audio frequencies up to 4.1 to 7.5 kilohertz. So now we've got audio writing on, well, this is at I guess you'd call it the baseband. This one is writing on a subcarrier that's 4 kilohertz up. Then we've got another subcarrier and another one, 4, 8, and 12. So here we're showing 4 different streams of audio that can all be combined and modulated onto a single transmitter. So let me back this up again. I don't think I've got a bigger, yeah, here I got it. So we've got our 4 channels here. We're going to sum them, and then we're going to take these and apply them to the transmitter. So we're going to modulate our transmitter with all 4 of these, which are actually multiplexed audio signals. Send it over to a receiver, demultiplex it, and then break them down to the individual channels again. So in Gary's case, he'd have different program information on each of these, and when they got shipped across to wherever it was going, it'd be separated out and then applied to the right source. All right. So I mentioned some more common cases down here. I guess we already talked about those. So it's 2 or more information streams combined onto a baseband group. You might remember the term baseband. We defined it in an earlier class as the information that's impressed on a carrier to transmit that signal across the country. In this case, our baseband group happens to be 4 audio channels. Then the other one is time division multiplex. Time division, time slots. Make that association, it'll help you. What are we doing here? It's totally different. We've got 4 different audio sources, A, B, C, well actually 5 in our diagram. So we're going to have a switch that's rapidly switching between all of these voice channels, and it's going to be happening so fast that we're going to be able to do an optical illusion here, or an electronic illusion, to cause these to be heard on the other end as if you had a direct connection between the 2. So we're going to sample this one and then send it off, and then each one of these channels, each one of these audio streams, we're going to insert into time slots. So we've got this one, the red, green, and blue. So we're going to be sending it across the radio carrier, be looking like this, and then we'll take it apart again at the other end. So the key definition to realize here is digital time division MUX. 2 or more signals are arranged to share discrete time slots of a data transmission. A little bigger piece there. Now the monkey turning that switch is going to get tired after a while. This is happening really fast. Okay, all stuff we've talked about, just repeating. And the switching speed is fast enough to create the impression of a dedicated circuit for each conversation. And we're just showing 4 here, but this can be many more than that, like 48 or more.
And I just wanted to show off my German. If you look at the red, green, and blue on the right-hand side where it says Schutzbänder, I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation. That's in German, that's protection bands. We would call them in English guard bands. So they're in time, in the time domain, there's the areas that we can separate them out.
Yep, so that they won't drift. And I think you mentioned in a prior class, Gary, that sometimes if the timing gets off, these conversations can bleed into one another.
Indeed.
So that would be bad. But you got the concept now. Time division, time slots. Where do we see it in amateur radio? Well, D-Star uses this technology, DMR. There's some digital modes. Some satellite repeater telemetry uses this technology. So it is used in ham radio. And in commercial use, digital phone circuits and ISDN, which I don't think is around anymore, but that they use this technique. Oh, some questions. I thought we'd never get here. All right, E1C09, what is the highest modulation index permitted at the highest modulation frequency for angle modulation below 29 megahertz?
Bravo.
Bravo, good, yep. 1.0. There's little technical facts that are sprinkled through the pool here that won't have much practical value, but we need to know them for the pool. So you want to get 100% on your exam, you don't know which question you're going to get. What is the modulation index of an FM signal? You may have to read through these. Modulation. Did I hear?
Delta.
Well, it turns out to be
Oh,
alpha.
delta.
It's the ratio of two.
Okay.
Yep. Ratio of frequency deviation to modulation signal frequency. Modulation index. Doesn't have the word maximum in there. That's how you differentiate the two. How does the modulation index of a phase modulated emission vary with RF carrier frequency?
Delta.
It is delta. I kind of gave it away and what I bolded there, and it won't be this way on your exam, of course, but I wanted to underscore the fact that vary with RF modulation index and varying with RF carrier frequencies, that it does not depend on RF carrier frequency. So the modulation index is going to be the same on 2 meters and 70 centimeters and every place else. So hopefully that'll help you. What is the modulation index of an FM phone signal having a maximum frequency deviation of 3,000 hertz either side of the carrier frequency if the highest modulating frequency is 1,000 hertz?
Alpha.
Alpha. See how easy that is? Here's another really tough one. Did we just do this one? Yeah. All right, here we go. What is the modulation index of an FM phone signal having a maximum carrier deviation of plus or minus 6 kilohertz if the highest modulating frequency is 2 kilohertz?
Bravo.
Yep,
Bravo.
same answer, different numbers, but it works out. So all of that complicated stuff that we saw, it boils down to just being able to identify a couple of technical facts and doing some real simple calculations. Speaking of which, what is the deviation ratio of an FM phone signal having a maximum frequency swing of plus or minus 5 kilohertz if the highest modulation frequency is 3 kilohertz?
Delta.
All right. You ought to kill these if you see them. These are gimmies, okay, once we understand what we're talking about here. Okay, and here's another one, works the same way. What is the deviation ratio of an FM phone signal having a maximum frequency swing plus or minus 7.5 kilohertz if the highest modulation frequency is 3.5 kilohertz?
Alpha.
Alpha, you can do that one in your head. What is deviation ratio? And again, I've given it away, but when you see deviation ratio, you think of,
Bravo.
yeah, the ratio of the maximum carrier frequency deviation to the highest audio modulating frequency. When you see highest audio modulating frequency, you can think of that as a maximum as well. So it's the ratio of two maximums. What is frequency division multiplexing?
Bravo. Bravo.
It is Bravo, dividing the transmitted signals into separate frequency bands that each carry a different data stream. We're using subcarriers. All right, and the other one, what is time division multiplexing?
Bravo.
Right.
Bravo.
And
I'm going to get the test with the bold
yeah,
words.
you got to pay extra for that test. But if you can make that association, it should jump out at you when you see it on the test. I've made this maybe easier in our presentation than it's going to be in real life, but I want you to make that connection. Those are your tricks in getting it. Good, we're through that. And to me, the modulation index, deviation ratio are the most complicated sounding things that we had to deal with in this part of the evening. All right. Going to get into some more fun things now. Symbol rate, protocols, and codes. First of all, a little bit of information on digital activity. Well, where do you go to find it? Well, again, we've got our considerate frequency or considerate operators guide that gives us these watering holes, I guess you could call it, places where digital activity is found on the ham bands. And here's our ICOM 7300 radio. If we if we had to have a totally generic radio to recommend when somebody says, what should I buy, for a new radio, usually we'll say the 7300, but you have to take into account how you're going to use it and a lot of other things as well. But if we had to provide only one answer, this would be it. Now, they've come out with a new version, which is supposed to be shipping by the end of the year, the IC 7300 Mark II. It has some upgraded features from the 7300. There's, I don't know, like 30,000 of these things that have been sold. It's one of those popular radios that's ever been made, and it's a really good one.
There's actually over 100,000 of the original.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. There's some countries where most of the hams in the country are running the 7300, someplace in South America I was reading. If you're wondering what to buy, this would be a generic recommendation, but take into consideration your other factors as well.
And the original is priced $1,000 or less. The new one is probably going to be $1,500.
Yep, and I've seen the original 7300 at Hamfest for around $800. That seems to be the going price for those. Of course, you can almost use two cans and a string if you want, but it's a lot more fun operating the newer radios if you can afford it. But there's no shame in starting much lower. There's a book that I recommend. It's called Get On the Air with HF Digital. Here's an Amazon link for it. It's about $23 for the paper version. And I don't know if you knew this, but Amazon Kindle, they offer some big incentives to authors if they'll make the Kindle version come in at $10 or less. So a lot of times you'll see a book like this, and like magic, the Kindle price is only $10. So this is now in its third edition. I bought the first and second and thought, that didn't do a lot for me. But the third edition is really pretty good. So if you're interested in getting into some of this stuff, I would recommend this book. It has chapters on VARA and WinLink, which we're not going to talk about until next week. That's a means of sending text messages or computer files over the air. They've got chapters on radio teletype, FT8, Whisper, and others. It's a pretty good book. It's not everything you need to know to be proficient in these modes, but it's a great place to get started. So getting into some definitions now. Bit. Does anybody know what bit stands for? You've all heard of bit buckets and bits and digital. What does bit stand for? Nobody knows. Binary digit, BIT. It's a fundamental unit of data, either a 0 or a 1. The bit rate, as you might imagine, is the number of digital bits per second sent from one computing system to another, BPS. Symbol, now we're going to add some complexity here. It's a characteristic of the transmitted signal that represents data. Now, symbol rate and bit rate are not necessarily the same thing, and I'll be demonstrating that. Symbol rate in a digital transmission is the rate at which the waveform changes to convey information. Well, how might the waveform change? Well, we could shift the phase, we could shift the amplitude, we could put in different tone frequencies. So that's what they're talking about, the rate at which the waveform changes to convey information. More on that to come. Now baud or bauds, number of symbols sent per second. So we've got a symbol rate, we've got a bit rate, and they don't have to be the same. The relationship between symbol rate and baud, well, they are the same. So there's actually a pool question that is going to try to trip you there, but just realize that symbol rate and baud refer to the same thing. So some more concepts stolen from Dave Kassler. We're going to consider data link versus air link. So here we've got Bob and Alice, and they're wanting to communicate with one another, and they're going to want to do it by radio. So here we've got an air link. From a transmitter to a receiver, we're going over the air. So Bob and Alice might not be aware of all of the things that are happening to make that happen, make that occur, but they know that they can talk to one another. It's the air link. And then we've got a data link. So Bob and Alice, they just want to communicate. We know that it's going over the radio, but the computers that are in the circuit they really don't care about Bob and Alice very much. They just care about the data that they need to send and receive. They don't necessarily care what's going on over here. So that's the data link. It's the ones and zeros. So here's the complete communication channel. So we go from Bob, information into a computer. We modulate a transmitter. We demodulate it over here. Comes down to Alice. So we've got a virtual data link, computer to computer. And then we have a virtual information link, which is person to person. And a comment at the top, a protocol plus modulation technique is a mode. And they get into protocols and codes in our book, but there aren't any pool questions, and it's not really totally necessary to figure out what those mean exactly. For us, we would just consider a mode like radio teletype, for example, and that includes a protocol and a modulation technique, but we just call it radio teletype, or RIDI, just one example. So here's an example of baud versus bit rate. So we're going to pretend that we are at a party and it's very noisy, and they're serving food at that party, and we can communicate with somebody on the other side of the room. It's noisy, so we can't really shout and get our message over. So let's say that we hold up one hand. Let's call that one signaling event, or a symbol. In this example, one signaling event can represent 6 states. We've got 5 fingers and a closed fist. So we're going to see in the next slide that even though we've just got these 6 states, it would be possible to convey up to 32 pieces of information with just that one hand. Save that for the next slide. So if we raise our hand once per second, that's 1 baud, which can turn out to be 32 bits per second, which we'll see. So in this case, I'm going to raise a hand with 1 finger, and that's that's actually Gary doing that, and it tells me that he wants a Coke, so I need to bring him a Coke. If he raises 1 fist with 2 fingers, he wants a Coke and a cheeseburger. So that's a means, and he's nodding over there, so he's all excited. He must have missed dinner tonight. So how does this happen in electronics? So we can either be shifting phases rather than raising fingers. We can be changing tone frequencies. We can be sending discrete levels. We just raise our hand part way or all the way up. All right, well, let's see how we can convey many more pieces of information by applying values to each of our fingers. So here we got all 5. The thumb is going to represent 1. Then we got 2, 4, 8, and 16. So if we hold up a hand with all of our fingers and thumb extended, that could represent a number up to 31. And taking different combinations here, you can see that we can signal any number between 0 and 31. That would be 32 states, including the 0, 2, 6, 14, 30, 31. Now, it would be really, really tough if we wanted to order a pizza and each number represented a different ingredient. It'd get really complicated trying to figure out to decode that if somebody just raised their hand quickly. That's child's play for a computer, though. Computer can do that very easily, but I wanted to show you the concept of a symbol. Symbol is raising a hand, and that symbol can represent more than one number of bits, as shown here. So here's another way of looking at it. So a more efficient digital code, and here's where the word code jumps in, more efficient digital code can increase the data rate without increasing the bandwidth. So our raising of our hand, the number of fingers doesn't really affect the bandwidth of our signal in that case, but we can assign different numbers of bits to each one of those fingers. So here's an example. At 300 baud, be 300 changes of something per second with 2 states. That's 300 bits per second. If we can represent 4 states, that doubles all the way up to 32 states, 4800. So you can see that a more efficient digital code can increase the data rate without increasing the bandwidth. by assigning a different number of bits to each one of those states. Now, in the good old days, I don't know how many of you might remember dial-up when we had AOL and CompuServe. You were just living the life if you had a 56K modem. That was fabulous. Dial-up modem. Of course, we think that's pretty silly today when we've got direct internet connectivity. So here's a trip down memory lane. I thought I'd throw this in here. I found this, what prompted me to include this, I found one in my junk box at home. So I brought one over, and it's on the calculator cam. US Robotics 56K. Got all of these little symbols on it. And back in the day, we used to have to worry about setting, you can't really see it too well, but these are dip switches where you can configure how the modem's going to operate. We've got a place to plug in your telephone, and pass right through, place for power, and this is the connector that goes to the computer. And then all kinds of configuration data here for how to set the dip switches. So this was just the absolute max. Modems, dial-up modems started out at 300 baud, and they finally moved up to a theoretical maximum of 56K. So I'm going to see if this will work for us. Call this a trip down memory lane. And if this works, what you're going to hear is the modem dialing out. You'll hear touch tones, and then you'll hear a sequence of funny little beeps and boops. What's happening when you hear that is that the modem is talking to the computer on the far side, and they're negotiating a data rate. They'll go as high as they can and back down until they can find a data speed that both of them can operate at. Then it starts to pass data, and then it mutes. You don't have to listen to the annoying sound. So let's see if this will work for us. We'll need to drag this over to, here we go. It's going out?
Yeah.
So it ended there with the data actually transmitting. So we heard it dialing the remote over a phone line out to the remote computer. We heard them negotiating to find the highest possible speed. When they finally settled on it, it started transferring the data, and then it muted itself. So there's probably a few of you that got started that way.
And I just wanted to point out the bandwidth of the phone line didn't change. It was still a 3 kilohertz bandwidth, but the bit rate changed. It went faster.
Yep, exactly. And 56K was actually maybe a little bit optimistic.
I never got there.
Yeah, 36K was the upstream number, and 56K was the theoretical downstream. But the phone lines were never quite good enough to do that well. But still, it was the best that you could do back in the day. These were originally about $130 back in the day in the 90s. Today you can find them for $20 on eBay. There are still some dial-up services available if anybody's interested. I don't think that there will be, though. So just thought I'd share that historical perspective. All right, let me get out of this. Oh, and that takes us right into some questions. What is the definition of symbol rate in a digital transmission? Charlie, the rate at which waveform changes to convey information. That's symbol rate, like raising your hand in the room. How can data rate be increased without increasing bandwidth?
Robin.
No.
No.
Answer is Charlie using a more efficient digital code. In other words, assigning more bits to each symbol. What is the relationship between symbol rate and baud?
Alpha.
Thank you. Good. They're the same. Don't let that one trick you. Now we're into protocols and codes. Terms you don't really need to know, but we'll talk about them. So does anybody know what the item on the left is? To get my mouse back over to where I can use it.
It's one of them rings that tells you your vital signs and your health and all that.
Well, it can. It's a decoder ring. Each letter is corresponding to a code. So you might get something from your friend that has a series of numbers, and then you just advance this ring to each number to determine what the letter is. You remember Little Orphan Annie's decoder ring? That's
Nobody's that old.
Nobody's that old. Well, that was from the movie Christmas Story. And that was a really, really big deal back then. People would save box tops and send them in because they wanted this magic decoder ring. And it turns out what the secret code was buy more Ovaltine. So he was kind of disgusted with that. So anyway, that's not what this is. The other thing that I've got here is a piece of paper tape. Now this we're going to see when we get more into radio teletype, and I've got some here that I brought along. I think you can sort of read that. So what we're seeing here, what you could do, you could go to a telegraph office and tell them what you wanted to send somebody, and they'd punch it onto a paper tape like this. And then later they'd take it over to a machine, and they'd run the tape through the machine, and that would communicate with the teletype unit on the far end of the circuit to transmit your message. This isn't very clear because the holes aren't punched real well, but there's a series of punched holes in the tape corresponding to the text that goes across the top. Now, protocols are rules, nothing in blue here, okay? Protocol rules for encoding, packaging, and exchanging and decoding digital data. So there's a protocol in terms of real life. Like when you meet somebody for the first time, there's normally a set of rules before communication takes place. Eye contact, and smile, maybe a handshake. So computers do the same thing. Now, the protocol that we use most frequently in ham radio is called the AX25 protocol. You might have heard of the A.25 protocol used in digital communications or in computer communications. This is adapted for, or X25, AX, that stands for amateur, X25, modified. So that's a protocol. Code, rules to change information from one form to another. That's like our secret decoder ring. Letters to define patterns, and some specific ones are Morse code, Varicode, Baudot, and ASCII. We'll be getting into each of those as we move forward. So let's talk about codes with variable lengths. There's two that are mentioned in our chapter. The first one is Morse code. Morse code is kind of unique in that the shorter characters, like the E, is a single dit. A T is a single dash, or da. So these are the very common letters that we see in the English alphabet. Here's the less common ones, and you see that there's many more code elements to describe those letters. We have a digital mode called PSK31 that also uses variable length character coding, where it's sending a shorter series of data characters for the shorter letters. A lot of people have never seen this before. So let's talk about the Morse code varicode. It says start here. Like when you're in a shopping center, it says you are here. Well, that's our start point. And notice the letter E. It's a single dot. So the easy ones are over here. Dot, dot dash, or da, and down the line. For the one that's really complicated, let's go for Y, for example. How are we going to get there? Well, that's a dash, a dash, dot, dash, da 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 da. So that's a long one. So this goes back to 1844, back when we were having a wireline communication. Radio wasn't really in vogue back at that time, but Morse code came back to that time. Telegraph key, and this is a type case. I've got another picture of one here, some more history. So back in the good old days, when they had printing presses that were mechanical, they would have something called a type case here. So this lower part had all of the small letters, the small letter E, the small letter I, which we call lowercase letters. And then here we had the uppercase letters. See, we have a literal case, we've got an upper and a lower. So here's the caps, here's the lower, the lower letters. So that's where the terms uppercase and lowercase came from. When Morse and Vail were putting together the Morse code, they looked at the printer cases, said, okay, well, the most frequently used letter in the English language is going to be the one with the biggest box here. Turned out to be E. So that's how they assigned the code elements to the Morse code. That's how we wound up with these things. Now, whatever you do, if you're interested in learning Morse code, don't try to do it this way, all right? This just illustrates how it happens. To learn Morse code, you want to learn the sounds of each letter as a complete group. So here's a varicode, PSK 31. This is a little bit hard to read. I guess you can see it, but it shows some of the different letters. And I've highlighted E and I. Notice that the code for those letters is just a 11 or 1101. So those are very short. Now here's some that are a little bit nastier. Here's a G and a J. Much, much longer code. It has to be transmitted over the air. So it takes a lot longer to send those kinds of letters. So the bit lengths can vary from 1 to 10. We've got short letters and long letters. Lowercase are more efficient. They have fewer number of elements. So if you're using PSK 31, keep your caps lock key off. Thought I had more. Okay, I've added links on a lot of these pages with articles where you can learn some more if you care to. But I just wanted to show you the concept of that variable length coding. Then a new subject here, automatic link establishment. There was a pool question on ALE, and I really didn't understand what it was back when we were first putting this material together, so I did a little bit of research and came up with some nice pictures here. So it automatically determines the best band for communication between two stations. So if this is me in South Carolina, and this is you in California, what band would be the best for us to try to communicate on? Well, ALE is an automated system that will alert an operator when a path is found. So it is actually being used in amateur radio. A few notes about it. When running correctly, it can initiate and establish connections between two stations without human intervention. That's the automatic part. So here we've got a case where 20 meters is making the path, but 17 meters, it's hopping right over. So we're not able to communicate on 17. In 40 meters, we're falling short. But 20 meters works. So ALE will test those bands and tell you what frequency you can use to make your contact. So here's the pool questions. Now how does an automatic link and establishment station establish contact? Constantly scans a list of frequencies, activating the radio when the designated call sign is received. We're moving through a number of concepts here, moving on to the next one. Something called the gray code. I don't know if that's because the picture is gray. No, it's the guy that invented it, I think. So gray code is digital code, allows only one bit to change between sequential code values. So what we have here is a code wheel. I think I have, yeah, better picture of one here where we've got a light source and we've got a code wheel. And on your radio, the VFO knob might be attached to this. So as you're rotating your VFO knob around, you're actually changing digital patterns being received by a photosensor on the other side of it. And that's why you can go around and around and around and never stop. It just keeps sending these predefined digital codes. Back to how it works. Now, in binary, well, first of all, decimal 0 through 7. We're familiar with that. Binary, we've looked at a little bit. We go from 000 to 010, and then we go to 010. We have to carry the 1 and put it in the next place. So we have cases when we're incrementing values that are only one value different, that more than one bit changes in binary. The gray code is arranged so that as you're incrementing your code wheel, there's only one bit in each successive increment that changes value. Now, why might that be of value? Well, originally, when these were being used to control heavy-duty machinery, you didn't want any chance of an error to occur. So the gray code was much less prone to error than just using something like binary, where you've got multiple things changing. If only one thing is changing, an error is less likely. Often used with rotary encoders, can facilitate error detection. What that means is as you advance forward, if more than one bit changes, then something's wrong. Bigger view of the way the numbers increment in an application. Now we're going to get to radio teletype, or RTTY as it's called. Now what's fascinating to me is a lot of these scientists were around way before we had radio. So all of this was developed by Emile Badeau. It's linked, you can learn more about him. And the magic, part of the magic is that, now this is a fixed length code. We talked about variable length codes, which was Morse code and PSK31. These are, the next couple will be fixed length codes. Badeau has got 5 bits. In this case, the letter D, let me see if I can decode it for you. Code elements 1 through 5. So it's the equivalent of 1, 0, 0, 1, 0 would be the letter D. These little holes in the middle are sprocket holes, where if you'd load the paper tape into a machine, that would pull the tape through the machine. So a couple of things here. If you've got 5 bits, how many states could that represent? We saw from our finger example that you could only come up with 32 different unique values with 5 bits. But they had a very ingenious approach to how they used this, in that they had a shift code between letters and figures. So if you sent if you're sending letters and then you sent the figures code 11011, then on the other end, everything would be interpreted according to what was in this bottom row. So now we could do all 26 letters of the alphabet, uppercase only, and then all of these symbols. Kind of an ingenious approach. And then when you wanted to shift back to letters, well, you'd send the letters code, and then everything would be interpreted as letters from there on. So D10010. Remember that. Also remember 5 bits, because there's a pool question where you're going to need that. All right, well, let's see what happens here. Now, with Badeau and with ASCII, which we'll talk about next, they have something, this is completely asynchronous. So at an idle state, we're going to be sending a certain tone, and then we're going to shift it. So those are called mark and space tones. In the origination of mark and space, back in the early days, they'd have a pen that would come down on a piece of paper, moving tape. that would make a mark on the paper. Then when you lift the pen, that's a space. So the very first implementation of Morse code used that approach. But mark and space have stayed with us ever since. So what happens? We're sending a continuous series of mark tones, and then we're going to have what's called a start symbol. Now what the start symbol does is it tells the receiving end something is about to happen. Okay, we just went from mark to space. Something is about to happen. Pay attention now. So pay attention to what's coming next. So we're going to go from a space to a mark for one time period. That's the B0, so that's going to be 1. Then we're going to transition and keep it low for 2, so we're going to have a 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. And then we have a stop symbol to tell the system on the other end that we're finished with that character. Stop symbol is about 1.5 one of these time periods. And then we'll start the next one. So I think, if I didn't lie to you, we just sent the symbol D, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. That's what it would look like. And here's our paper tape. It's kind of a diddle sound that when you hear it on the air, and the Considered Frequency Operator's Guide will tell you where to find RTTY on the bands. ASCII, American Standard Code for Information Interchange. This might be more familiar to some of you because pretty much all modern computer systems use this. Getting into the computer age now, we saw we were in the 1800s before. ASCII came on the scene in the 60s, 1960s, that is. There's a couple of flavors here. We can have either 7 or 8-bit ASCII. And we'll be talking about how these combine into packets. So the idea is the most significant bit, the one on the far left, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. Okay, this represents the letter A. Then we've got different letters represented by different bit patterns. And a bit is always a 1 or a 0. Now we can take this letter A and we can concatenate it into a packet. So these packets, each one of these packets contains, let's say, 8 bits. And then you can send that out as a group or a text message. And what happens in the real world, typically there's a header, gives you information about what's to follow. You've got the data or payload, and then something called parity, where you can detect certain kinds of errors. Here's an ASCII table. This one's showing one with 7 bits. Okay, that gives us 128 possible characters. So you can see that we can do all of the capital letters, all of the uppercase letters, all of the lowercase letters, a bunch of numbers and symbols. You can also have 8-bit ASCII, which doubles that number of characters, but normally what you'll see is the 7. 7 bits, 2 to the 7th is 128, which is how many characters we have. Some differences now between Baudot and ASCII. So we've got 5 bits per character for Baudot, 7 or 8 for ASCII. We've got stop bits, start bits, and parity bits. Talked about a little bit. The way parity works in ASCII, they'll count the number of 1s and 0s, and if there's more 1s than 0s, you'll set the parity bit one way, and if it's the other way, you get the other value. So you can detect some kinds of errors in the data. Now for ASCII, an advantage of using parity is that some types of errors can be detected. So you've got the right number of 1s, the right number of 0s. Some more differences. I put a little table together here. Blue represents things you'll see in the pool. So Baudot is 5 data bits per character. ASCII is 7 or 8 data bits per character. Baudot uses uses 2 special characters as letters, figures, shift codes. With ASCII, we don't need that. No letter or figure shift code. Baudot can only send uppercase text. An advantage of ASCII is you can send upper or lowercase text. Baudot has no parity, no error checking. ASCII parity bits can detect some types of errors. So just a comparison between the two, and the pool questions will ask us to differentiate those. So how do ALE stations establish contact? Going back to that concept.
Alpha.
It is alpha. ALE constantly scans a list of frequencies, activating the radio when the designated call sign is received. And there's actually, I don't think I put the link on the slide, but if you Google on ALE, there's actually a website that has the complete spec and all of the information on it for you. Which of the following HF digital modes uses variable length character coding?
Delta.
It is Delta PSK31. And we talked about Morse code too, but that's not in the list. What is the advantage of including parity bits in ASCII characters?
Delta.
Delta, some types of errors can be detected. What are some of the differences between Baudot digital code and ASCII? There's only one answer.
Bravo.
Bravo. There's only one answer that has the magic number in it. That was at 5 that I wanted you to remember. They give you every other possible opportunity to get it wrong, though, but 5 is your magic number. What is one advantage of using ASCII for data code for data communications?
Charlie.
Charlie, it's possible to transmit both uppercase and lowercase text. Which digital code allows only one bit to change between sequential code values?
Delta.
That's our gray code friend. Yep, exactly. All right, so we're going to just touch on digital modes. Actually, this would be an ideal time to take a break because we've been at it for about an hour. So let's take our break at this point, and then we'll pick up on digital modes next. 5 minutes to go do something other than this. Greetings. We're back after our break. We've got probably half hour, 45 minutes left, and we'll be wrapped for tonight. So we're going to move a little bit more information on digital modes. So we're talking primarily HF here, below 30 megahertz. We have some very narrow bandwidths. As we saw before, a single sideband voice is about 300 hertz wide. Morse code at 13 words per minute is about 52 hertz wide. Very, very narrow. You get a lot of CW into the space of one sideband. PSK 31 is even narrower. And you can get up to 50 words per minute using PSK 31, which is a decent typing speed. It's good for most people if they're using that mode. So frequency shift keying, we're going to focus on that for a second, is a type of modulation used for data emissions below 30 megahertz. That would be like PSK 31. People can usually talk about 120 words per minute, just as a point of reference. And there's an analogy that has been helpful to me. If you could imagine a bowl of water and then take your finger right in the middle of that bowl and tap the water, you'll be making waves. Or if you're a science fiction freak, you're disrupting the space-time continuum with your finger. So how do we select the different modes? We're talking about some of these modes here. How do we select them? Well, I think this is a picture of my 7610. If I tap the screen in a certain place, it brings up these options: single sideband, CW, etc. So I just tap one of those to change the mode. Right now we're in CW. If I tapped single sideband, it would switch to the single sideband mode. A little bit more on frequency shift keying. This is something that we use with radio teletype. The concept is two different tones shifting from one frequency to another. And here you see a spectrum display, probably during a contest. You don't normally see a lot of RTTY on the air day to day, but there's several contests during the year that are dedicated to radio teletype, and the band is just packed with people. So you can kind of see these signals with the two little peaks on them. Looks like horns. So the concept is we've got two different tones shifting from one frequency to another. The rapidly changing tones are called mark and space. We referred to those terms before. Space represents 0, mark represents 1. So here we're seeing it in another context, and here's a spectrum, another display, a waterfall display. And the difference between these is typically 170 hertz. The mark and space tones are 2125, 2295, so fairly high frequency tones. And then there's software programs that will generate these, encode them and decode them. Another picture we stole from Kessler. So he's indicated that we've got the mark and space tones. They're typically 170 hertz apart. Back in the good old days, when this first got started, and people were using TNCs, terminal node controllers, the PK232 was a real popular one. A lot of people used that. It had 200 hertz spacing, which was non-standard, but it was close enough. Those will still work today. And there's something called a weekly RTTY test. Put a link here if you want to get involved with RTTY. Every week there's a 30-minute, I think it's on Wednesday nights, where you can set up your equipment and actually see how many people, or see if there's any people you can talk to on radio teletype. So that happens every week, if you care to get into it. Here's a link for that. Oh, it's every Thursday night for half an hour. I got it in my notes. So how do we create frequency shift keying? Well, there's some controversy in the ham radio world between these two methods. Let me explain them first. We have a direct FSK, frequency shift keying. We've got a computer. It generates ones and zeros, basically, on a control line to the radio. And those ones and zeros are highs and lows, turns out. directly modulates the transmitter oscillator, the variable frequency oscillator. This is called direct FSK because we're directly shifting the frequency, directly changing the oscillator. The other one is called audio FSK. This works completely different, but when it's set up correctly, it works exactly the same. It sounds exactly the same as direct. So how does that work? So we got software in the computer. We've got a USB cable. Goes to a sound card, which could be external or it could be built into your radio. In this case, we're going to be generating audio tones. Remember that mark and space frequency I talked about in the 170 hertz shift? We're going to apply that to the radio, the equivalent of a microphone input signal with a radio in lower sideband. Lower sideband is the default mode for radio teletype and transmitting it. So here we're using audio tones transmitted on single sideband. Here we're actually shifting the frequency of the oscillator. On the receiving side, if these are set up correctly, you can't tell the difference. So the difference, context to the pool, direct FSK modulates the transmitter VFO, shifts the oscillator directly. Now the controversy I talked about, some hams claim that direct FSK is better. Well, if audio FSK is set up, you can't tell the difference, so that negates that argument. But audio FSK does have to be set up correctly. If the levels are too high, you'll be distorting the tones, and if they're too low, of course, you'll have weak signals. So that's the advantage or disadvantage. Direct FSK is a little bit more trouble-free if your radio supports it, and pretty much all radios manufactured in the last 10 years do. So for troubleshooting, a lot of the software that will set you up for radio teletype or frequency shift keying will have a tuning indicator. So if you're receiving I'll keep using that as an example, these represent the two tones. Notice that they're exactly perpendicular and they're exactly the same height and width. So diagram A shows proper tuning and equal levels of mark and space. It's kind of intuitive. Okay, diagram B, notice that one of these is shorter than the other one, and it's not straight up and down. So it's telling us that there may be some mistuning and a weak tone. So this could be a technical problem in your radio. And then diagram C shows mistuning. You see this is offset. And the spacing is not accurate. These are things that you can derive from the display. If the spacing was correct, these would be perpendicular to one another. And then there's something called selective fading, which to me is amazing. If one of these ellipses suddenly disappears, that means all of a sudden your radio receiver can't hear it. Now selective fading, if we're talking a frequency shift of over only 170 hertz, that's pretty sharp selectivity. The ionosphere can actually do that though, believe it or not. So just some information you may see depending on the software that you're using for running radio teletype. We're going to get in, the next subject is bandwidth for amateur modes. Our license manual shows the version 2 of this manual. This manual is available for free on the internet as a PDF. I highly recommend that you do not read it. Unless you're having trouble going to sleep. It's pretty technical, but it gets into all of the details of how to determine bandwidth for all of the different amateur modes. But it is available if you care to look into it. Now I'm going to give you some shortcuts. There's some formulas that are in our license manual that are listed this way. Bandwidth equals B times K. All right. Well, bandwidth in hertz, how wide is your signal? What is the symbol rate in baud, not bits per second? And what is the shaping factor? Bandwidth equals symbol rate times shape factor. Well, understanding what all of these mean can be kind of complicated. Comment, no free lunch applies to bandwidth. Faster baud or symbol rate means more bandwidth. So this is a formula. You don't have to memorize it. So here we've got a case of frequency shift keying or audio frequency shift keying. It winds up sounding the same on the receive side. It's K times shift plus B, and then all of this fun stuff. So the bandwidth of a 4800 hertz frequency shift, 9600 baud bandwidth ASCII FM transmission. Wow, a lot of words and things to think about. And how do I plug those into the formula and wind up getting this right answer? Well, it's perfectly fine if you want to memorize the formula and do it this way. I've got a much better way for you to do it. This little picture on the bottom gives you an idea of what we mean by bandwidth. So it's the occupied bandwidth of a signal. Skirts on both sides, and here's where the data information resides. So for an exam tip, for these kind of questions, if you can just choose the answer closest to shift plus baud, okay? So this one, the question had a 4800 hertz frequency shift, 9600 baud. So what I'm telling you is if you just add shift plus baud, you're going to come out with something pretty close. So when you look at this one, just add the numbers and see which answer is closest to the correct one. This shortcut will give you 14.4 kilohertz. The formula answer is 15.36, and this one is the only one that's even close to that. You're welcome. All right, here's a thought question. Well, what about the bandwidth for CW, which is rated in words per minute? We don't have this concept of shift going on. All right, so with CW, remember my bowl and my finger, and we're tapping the water in the bowl at a certain rate. That rate would be the words per minute. So here's the complicated part that you don't really need to know, but we'll give you the background that makes it work out. The factors that affect the bandwidth of a transmitted CW signal are keying speed, that would be the words per minute, and the shape factor, which is the rise and fall time. So there's a standard word, as it's called, for evaluating CW systems. And that word is Paris. It's the letters P-A-R-I-S. There's 5 characters make up one word. And we'll see in the next slide, this will translate to 0.8 baud. So the formula is words per minute times 0.8 times K, the shaping factor, where K is 3 to 5, reflecting on the abruptness of the keying waveform. A more abrupt change is larger. I'll show some pictures of that. Well, this is all nice and accurate information, but you don't really need to memorize that to get to the right answer. So the approximate bandwidth of a 13 word per minute CW signal, 13 times 0.8 times 5 equals 52 hertz. Now the exam shortcut that I'll give you is the words per minute times 4. Words per minute, in this case, what was it, 13 times 4, that works out to 52 as well. So just take the words per minute times 4 and you'll be at the right answer. It's totally fine if you memorize all of this stuff, but you really don't need it. A little bit more on Paris. Well, this is what CW would look like. The letter P is dot, dash, dash, dot, or da-da-da-dit. That's the code speak version. That's an actual terminology reference, code speak. A, okay, then between a letter, we've got 3 spaces. The fundamental timing unit in CW is the dot, okay? So 1 dot, a dash is 3 dots. There's the space of 1 dot between each of those code elements. And then between each character, there's 3 spaces, blanks. Then we got the letter A, 3 spaces, R, da-da-dit, 3 spaces, I, 3 spaces, S, and then the inter-word spacing is 7 dits for a total of 50. See how nice that works out? Nice round number. So 50 dit links for the word Paris, plus following space. The dit is the symbol. That's like key up, key down. So that's 50 symbols per word. 1 word per minute is 50 symbols divided by 60 seconds. That's where they get the 0.8 symbols per second. Don't really need to know that, but it's just, it feels good to know that these things do all match up with something reasonable. Now, if you want to learn CW, I've got 2 very important recommendations for you. One is the Long Island CW Club. There's a link to it here, and for some reason their website's been down for the last 2 days, but this is the correct link. And then CW Ops, CW Operators Club Academy. That's another excellent program. I'm a member of both organizations, but I don't teach in either of them. So let's see what Paris sounds like. I'm going to see if this works. It worked earlier. So what we should hear, it'll be sent twice. I'm going to send it at 13 words per minute. Let's see if it'll work for us. Okay, I'll do that once more. P-A-R-I-S. So that's what it sounds like at 13 words per minute. It used to be that to pass the general class exam, you had to be able to transmit and receive at 13 words per minute. So that's the speed that we used to have to do that at. Not required anymore. One advantage of learning CW and operating CW, the person on the other end doesn't know if you're a dog, okay? Or if you're a male or a female, or if you have trouble with, if you've got a really difficult vocal accent, well, CW solves all of that for you. So there's another advantage to CW in that it's much more efficient in terms of operating capability. So it's been said that 1 watt of CW is worth 100 watts of single sideband in terms of being able to communicate. So that's another reason. So just a few tidbits for you there.
Yeah, we sidebanders have to do it 20 dB better.
Yes, exactly right. A little bit. So yeah. So if you've got worked, if you've got a DXCC award or in any of those high-end awards, if you've done it on CW, you're a serious operator. The high power, good antennas. It's easier on CW. So a little bit more on phase shift keying now. We talked about PSK 31. When it first came out, it just took the ham radio world by storm. It was humongously popular, okay? So this was back in 1998, invented by Peter Martinez, a Brit. And then a little bit later, much later actually, 2017, FT8 was released, Joe Taylor. And that all of a sudden became hugely popular, probably the most popular mode out there today. So what is the bandwidth of PSK 31? Well, it works out to about 37.5 hertz, so it's pretty narrow. One of the narrowest digital HF modes. And there's some tricks that are used here to minimize bandwidth for PSK. The phase of a PSK signal is changed at the zero crossing of the RF signal. I've got a diagram of that coming up in a bit that I think will make that a little bit clearer. And then the use of sinusoidal, like a sine wave, data pulses minimizes the bandwidth of a PSK signal. So there's 2 mechanisms built into the mode that cause it to take up very little space, very little bandwidth. And I'll diagram those for you. There's all kinds of variation. PSK 16, 125, quadrature, phase shift keying, all kinds of them. And hams, when they have a SCED set up, a prearranged conversation with somebody, they'll decide usually in advance what mode they want to use. So here are the pictures that I promised you. When we change phase at the 0 crossing point, notice that our sine wave is doing this, and then at a 0 crossing point, we're going to immediately change direction. Remember I talked about the finger in the water? Well, if you do this phase change when nothing is tapping the water, so to speak, it's kind of I'm stretching this analogy way beyond what it deserves, but you can see there wouldn't be any disruption in the space-time continuum at that point because it's a 0 crossing. You might remember with in the example of a single sideband, if there's no audio being sent, there's no power going out the transmitter. So that concept kind of plays into it here. So what happens, we've got a continuous signal, which is interpreted as a 1, and then at this magic point in time, we reverse the phase, and we're going to keep that phase reversed for 2 time periods. So we've just transmitted a 1, 0, 0. We're going to reverse the phase again and hold it there for 2 time periods. That's a 1, 1. We're going to reverse again, and it goes on and on. So by changing phase at the 0 crossing points, it takes up a lot less bandwidth. And then the concept of sinusoidal data pulses, notice that we're making these changes at those 0 crossing points and that we're shaping that waveform. So it's not a sudden step up and a sudden step down. Square waves, of course, generate lots of harmonics, and that takes up a lot of bandwidth. So by using sinusoidal data pulses, we have nice smooth transitions and we minimize the bandwidth. Now with that said, let's go back to the previous slide and see if these make sense. To minimize the bandwidth, the phase of a PSK signal should be changed at the 0 crossing of the RF signal. I paraphrased that a little. The use of sinusoidal data pulses minimizes the bandwidth. So here we see the 0 crossing points, and we see the shaped or sinusoidal data pulses. Now on to CW. This is very bad. This is very good. Let's see what I'm talking about. The primary effect of extremely short rise or fall times is the generation of key clicks. Remember, a square wave is composed of all kinds of odd harmonics. And if you would actually, if your transmitter were operating this way, you'd be generating something that they're called key clicks. That's because that's what it sounds like on the air. It'd be much better, this is no shaping, but if you do some shaping, we're going to increase the rise time. Here the rise time is practically instantaneous. The fall time is practically instantaneous.
We don't see your laser pointer.
I think if I had my laser pointer turned on, it would be much better. Okay, so yeah. Thank you, Gary. So yeah, we see the very sharp rise times, very sharp fall times. If we shape that signal to prevent the RF carrier from coming up, the instant you close the key, you get rid of those fast rise times. So the most common method of reducing key clicks is to increase keying waveform rise and fall times. Now there's a little bit of a trap here in that when you first look at this, you think it would be just the opposite. Let me explain. So if we're going to increase the rise and fall times, it's going to take longer to get from here to here. So we're increasing the rise time. We're not making it sharper, we're making it smoother. You're going to be tempted to pick the opposite one when you see the pool question, unless you think of it that way. Now, QST magazine, when they review radios, they'll usually have this diagram that talks about keying waveforms. So here they've got a scope, and this is what you're keying it with, using an electronic keyer, keying the transmitter. This is what's actually being transmitted. You see the nice gradual rise and fall. It's plenty broad enough so that you'll get the full value of the code element, but you're not instantly going from 0 carrier to max carrier. So this would be an avoidance of key clicks. So a good CW signal would look something like this. In every review you'll see in the magazines will usually have these waveforms. All right, so what is the approximate bandwidth of a 13 word per minute international Morse code transmission?
Charlie.
It is Charlie. 4 times 13 will get you there. What factors affect the bandwidth of a transmitted CW signal?
Charlie.
That's Charlie again, keying speed and shape factor, which is rise and fall time. What is the primary effect of extremely short rise or fall time on a CW signal?
Charlie.
Well, you sure like Charlie. Generation of key clicks. What is the most common method of reducing key clicks?
Charlie.
That's the one I warned you about. Think about it a little.
Not reducing.
Alpha.
It is alpha. We need to increase the keying
Increase.
waveform. Yeah, that one you're going to want to jump to C, but it's A. And then if you think about it, it'll make sense. So don't let that one get you. Which of the following types of modulation is used for data emissions below 30 megahertz?
Bravo.
It is Bravo, frequency shift keying. It's used every place else too, but there's a lot of it below 30 megahertz. What is the difference between direct FSK and audio FSK?
Alpha.
Alpha.
It is alpha. Direct FSK modulates the transmitter VFO. We're directly changing the oscillator frequency. What is the bandwidth of a 4800 hertz frequency shift 9600 baud ASCII FM transmission?
Alpha.
You may remember that because we had that in our slide, but if you just add these two numbers and pick the one that's closest, I think that works out to 14.4 or something like that. There's only one that's close. That way you won't have to remember that silly formula. It's not silly, but it's a lot easier just to add these numbers. Why should the phase of a PSK signal be changed at the zero crossing of the RF signal?
Alpha.
Alpha.
It is alpha. It minimizes the bandwidth. You get a lot more signals in the same amount of RF spectrum if you can minimize the bandwidth. What technique minimizes the bandwidth of a PSK31 signal? The other factor.
Charlie.
Charlie.
That was Charlie. Use of those gradual rising and falling data pulses. Kind of relates to the CW case we looked at. Oh no, we're finished. We're finished 20 minutes early. What are we going to do, Gary?
I think we can let them go home.
Well,
We could ask them if they had any questions.
any questions? Yeah, questions or comments or whatever. Next week we're going to get into some more fun things, some very interesting things. About half of our session will be on amateur TV, which is kind of an old technology, but for whatever reason, they still have a lot of pool questions related to it. And the way that it works is really quite fascinating. So we'll go through all of that next week and talk about packet modes and some other things. So read the rest of the chapter, and I'll be sending out an email and giving you all of the specifics. After,
Thank you all for your attention tonight.
yeah, after that is the biggie, antennas and feed lines. So that's a week after next. Mr. Gary will be doing that. All right, yes, thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
73.
Thank you,
y'all.
guys.
Yep,
Thanks.
73.
Thanks for helping me pass my general. 73.
you're welcome. We love to hear that.
Thank you.